Finally, after a period of silence, the Federal Aviation Administration, otherwise known as the FAA, has addressed the Starship launch situation. However, their statements show no sign of repentance or acknowledgment of Starship's monumental importance. Instead, they have unleashed a barrage of baseless rebuttals, which Elon Musk has described as an inept and politically driven response. So, why is the FAA making these inaccurate statements? What are they hiding? How has Musk exposed these issues? Let's find out in today's episode of Alpha Tech. On September 24th, FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker, along with lawmakers from the House Transportation Committee, held an in-person conference. During the meeting, Whitaker defended the decision to delay the launch of SpaceX's Starship, asserting that the company did not comply with licensing and permit requirements. This came after Musk voiced concerns that FAA bureaucracy was hindering the company's ambitions. Whitaker explained that the decision to postpone SpaceX's launch by several months was driven by safety concerns. He also defended the proposed $633,000 fine against SpaceX as the only tool the FAA has to ensure compliance with regulations. This fine is related to 2 launches SpaceX conducted in 2023 without the agency's approval of their plans. Additionally, the FAA made a separate decision to delay SpaceX's 5th test launch of the Starship super rocket due to non-compliance with launch licensing procedures. Furthermore, Whitaker acknowledged his desire for SpaceX to operate at the highest level of safety given their 20 years of experience. He stated,
"They've been around 20 years, and I think they need to operate at the highest level of safety, and that includes adopting a SMS program, and it includes having a whistleblower."
At first glance, one might interpret Whitaker's comments as a demonstration of trust in SpaceX. However, this actually reflects the FAA's strict oversight and heightened demands specifically related to Starship. This raises the question, are they not requiring the same level of safety from other companies as well? Developing a new vehicle of Starship's scale and groundbreaking technology is inherently challenging, even for experienced companies like SpaceX. Mistakes are to be expected during this process. Therefore, the FAA should be cautious about imposing excessively strict standards on Starship simply because SpaceX has previously succeeded with the Falcon 9. Do you agree with this perspective? Share your thoughts in the comments section down below. Regarding the delays in launch permits for Starship, Whitaker stated,
The delay of the Starship had to do with SpaceX filing an application and not disclosing that they were in violation of Texas and federal law on some matters, and that's a requirement to get a permit.
Whitaker's defense was a response to Representative Kevin Kiley, a California Republican, who questioned whether the FAA was subjecting SpaceX to undue scrutiny and hindering innovation. Whitaker explained that the delay, pushed back to November instead of the hoped-for August, was related to licensing laws governing spacecraft launches and the latest environmental analysis concerning sonic booms in the vicinity of Musk's Boca Chica, Texas launch site. This required the FAA to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service beforehand. The reasoning behind this is that SpaceX plans to attempt, for the first time, to return the booster to the Boca Chica site after separating from Starship, and the reentry could generate sonic booms that might impact local wildlife. Kiley argued that these assessments were unrelated to safety, to which Whitaker responded,
I think the sonic boom analysis is a safety-related incident. I think the 2-month delay is necessary to comply with the launch requirements, and I think that's an important part of safety culture.
During the hearing, Whitaker also mentioned that implementing a safety management system to identify and mitigate risks, similar to what airlines and manufacturers like Boeing require, would benefit SpaceX and should generally exist in the commercial space sector. After the hearing, FAA Administrator Whitaker spoke to reporters but did not address questions about whether he had communicated with Elon Musk regarding the incidents. He did, however, emphasize that companies like Boeing and SpaceX should have the same oversight and implement safety management systems even if on a voluntary basis. In a related statement, another FAA spokesperson clarified that the agency was not responsible for the Boeing Starliner returning empty from the International Space Station due to safety concerns. The Boeing Starliner reentry vehicle is not licensed by the FAA, the spokesperson noted. It is operating under the authority of NASA. This raises questions about the FAA's interpretation of fairness in its regulatory approach. Nonetheless, all of the reasons cited for the delay have been strongly contested by SpaceX in their latest correspondence to Representative Kiley. The company stated on its X page, FAA Administrator Whitaker made several incorrect statements today regarding SpaceX. In fact, every statement he made was incorrect. It is deeply concerning that the administrator does not appear to have accurate information immediately available to him regarding SpaceX licensing matters. Musk also weighed in sarcastically, remarking, "America is being smothered by legions of regulators, often inept and politically driven." In the letter to Representative Kiley, SpaceX detailed the issues targeted by the FAA Administrator, specifically addressing the delay of Starship Flight 5 from September to November due to concerns over sonic booms. The company asserted this has nothing to do with safety. FWS already reviewed Starship sonic booms and determined them to have no environmental impact for booms under 1 PSF. Additionally, the FAA alleged that SpaceX lacked a permit for its deluge system, which contributed to the delay in granting the launch license. SpaceX refuted this claim in the letter, stating SpaceX was operating under a permit from the TSEC. TSEC staff were physically present during the operation of the deluge. FAA and FWS have evaluated the use of the deluge and determined no environmental risk. The letter continued, the FAA, TSEC, and EPA have confirmed that deluge operations may continue in the interim, and the operation of the system will not change under this new permit. Although the FAA has yet to provide an immediate response, SpaceX and Elon Musk are steadfast in their fight for their rights. In this battle, they are not alone. Support from members of Congress plays an indispensable and crucial role. During the House hearing, Republican allies of SpaceX advocated for amending federal law to compel the FAA to expedite its reviews. Representative Brian Babin, Woodville representative, argued that delays in approving Starship for more launches threaten to hinder the United States' competitive edge in space exploration. With nations like China seeking to leapfrog our accomplishments in space, it is even more imperative that we streamline our processes, Babin stated at a recent U.S. House hearing. The national security implications posed by the FAA's regulations are very concerning, as our goal of returning humans to the moon could be unnecessarily delayed. Conversely, Democrats cautioned against this notion, labeling it dangerous. We don't like red tape, but there are environmental reasons behind taking a look at these launches, said Zoe Lofgren, California Democrat, a ranking member on the committee. We are in competition with China, but the Chinese government hasn't shown much concern about polluting their air and water. We care more about the American people. Additionally, SpaceX has consistently applied public pressure on the FAA by sending letters to U.S. Senator Ted Cruz and other members of Congress, asserting that the regulatory agency is obstructing its business operations. Recent letters from SpaceX represent another salvo against regulators who have imposed fines for environmental violations at its South Texas launch site and safety violations at its Florida facilities. These issues have contributed to delays in approvals for upcoming Starship launches from South Texas and stalled discussions about SpaceX's request to launch and land up to 25 Starships annually at Starbase. In a letter last week, SpaceX Vice President David Harris expressed concern that the nation's burgeoning space industry is outpacing the FAA's capacity to keep up. He noted that the agency's Office of Commercial Space Transportation faces systematic challenges that hinder its ability to process minor updates swiftly. For well over a year now, SpaceX has voiced its concerns regarding the FAA's inability to keep pace with the commercial space industry and the needs of U.S. government agencies that rely on commercial space launch capabilities for national security priorities, he wrote. On Tuesday, SpaceX Senior Director of Global Government Affairs Matt Dunn specifically called out FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker in a letter to U.S. Representative Kevin Kiley, California Republican. Such public confrontations are not new for SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, who has frequently criticized the FAA throughout the development of Starship in an effort to expedite launch approvals. The day after Dunn's letter was sent, Musk took to the X social media platform he owns to voice his frustrations with the FAA. Flight 5 is built and ready to fly, he posted. Flight 6 will be ready to fly before Flight 5 even gets approved by the FAA. He also referred to the FAA's recent actions against the company as lawfare and threatened to file a lawsuit against the agency, an approach he has employed several times in the past. In addition to Cruz, the recipients of last week's letter included Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington, chair of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation; Republican Frank Lucas of Oklahoma, chair of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology; and Representative Zoe Lofgren of California, the committee's ranking member. Hopefully, senators and those in positions of power in Congress can exert pressure on the FAA, encouraging the agency to adapt and evolve in line with the rapidly expanding space launch market, both now and in the future.
Is Starship on its 5th flight conducting the final test before launch? Is it too soon, given that the FAA license was promised for late November? Could SpaceX be planning to alter its original flight schedule? Resting proudly on the launch pad, a majestic 121-meter-tall Starship, including both stages, is covered in a white layer of frost. Yes, this was the latest test, September 24th, for Starship, prepping for the 5th flight, which SpaceX is calling the propellant load test. Propellant load test is a crucial step in the development and testing process of a stainless steel rocket. Typically, during this test, the rocket's fuel tanks are filled with the propellant it's going to use during flight. However, for this test, SpaceX only loaded a sufficient amount of fuel to at least verify and confirm the performance and integrity of the rocket's fuel system. This ensures the tanks, valves, pumps, and other components involved in handling the propellant work correctly and can withstand the extreme conditions encountered during liftoff and flight. By loading propellants into the rocket and simulating the conditions of an actual launch, SpaceX can assess various factors, including checking the fueling process to ensure the propellant can be safely and efficiently loaded into the rocket without leaks or issues. Next, they verify the pressure and temperature remain within the required ranges throughout the fueling process. Third, they confirm the rocket's structure can withstand the extremely cold temps of the cryogenic fuel without getting brittle or damaged. And finally, assessing the overall behavior and technology of the rocket under operational conditions, identifying any potential issues that need to be addressed before the actual flights. Everything proceeded smoothly as SpaceX announced propellant loader and pre-flight checkouts complete ahead of Flight 5. Elon, the chief engineer of SpaceX, shared the news and didn't forget to remind everyone that Starship is ready to fly. Musk's recent reminders, along with the new test, have sparked a wave of discussions in the space community. In fact, many think Elon and SpaceX might launch Starship ASAP even without FAA approval. Well, honestly, I'm pretty stoked for that to happen too, but I do want to clarify some things that people might easily misinterpret. First is the propellant load test. That's not the final test for Starship's flight. After this test, SpaceX does a wet dress rehearsal, and that takes place about a month before the actual launch, according to previous Starship launches. This process is designed to simulate every aspect of a launch except for the engine ignition and liftoff. More importantly, it includes fully fueling the rocket and passing all the tests that the same rocket needs to clear to be allowed to launch. But even if that test happens as early as possible, Starship still won't be able to fly soon because typically in previous launches, there's a bit of a gap between a wet dress rehearsal and the full launch. If SpaceX were to launch, regardless of whether the FAA grants permission, it's certain Elon and the company would be violating national regulations. And even if Trump did get reelected as POTUS, it would not be able to whitewash this infraction. So, no matter how much Elon and SpaceX want to launch Starship, the FAA is still an obstacle that's not going to go away. It may ease up a little bit if the Trump admin takes power and Elon enjoys the full support from the space community. Do you agree with this? Comment yes below to show us how much the public supports these two players. These complicated and outdated regulations of the FAA have once again been criticized by California Republican Congressman Kevin Kiley. In addition to praising SpaceX for Polaris Dawn, he criticized FAA in his speech to the House for tightening regs on the rocket company. There simply should not be delays related to paperwork or bureaucracy. With the company trying to make history and being so vital to global leadership and national security, it's inexplicable the FAA is trying to hold back its progress with frivolous fines and delays. Elon appreciated this, commenting appreciated right below a video of Congressman Kiley shared by a user on X. This shows that it's not just SpaceX that finds the FAA's restrictions too harsh for Starship launches, but other officials in Congress and the aerospace industry do too. Clearly, the environment and ecosystems are important, but is SpaceX being unfairly constrained? Many headlines have said that SpaceX is destroying, harming, or disregarding wildlife. But is that really the case? In fact, while the facilities have grown exponentially, their footprint is still relatively small compared to the vast area of South Texas. One resident who goes by the username Space Padre on X shared his firsthand experience in a comment, and this is far more credible and valuable than the written statements from environmental agencies. Space Padre recounted his 19 days working along the nearly 400-mile coastline of Texas. He said, "The footprint of SpaceX's starbase is ridiculously minuscule in comparison to our empty coastline. There's no pollution from SpaceX. There's no fish kills or bird kills. Biggest problem we have is the local beachgoers leaving trash on the beach. And SpaceX is even reaching out to the community to resolve that. There's much unfair untruths out there, and I'd be happy to sit down with anyone to tell them what great neighbors they've been. There's a lot of really amazing, hardworking people that work there. Most are locals. Their children depend on that paycheck." Speaking further about SpaceX, he commented, "I wish them all the best. And yes, as an environmentalist myself, I watch too. I think they're doing their best. It's impossible to be perfect, but one thing about SpaceX is their ability and willingness to innovate, and that includes local environmental concerns." Thanks to Space Padre for sharing a truthful account so we all get the real situation. Therefore, with all that the environmental agencies are doing with regard to SpaceX, they need to reconsider. Instead of limiting their launches for environmental safety, they need to mobilize their forces to clean up the trash on the beaches. Definitely a better use of their salaries. However, SpaceX is also being respectful. The recent propellant load test was conducted to help ensure they can execute a flawless flight, achieving the initial goal they set out to accomplish. Flight 4 of Starship made a step forward for SpaceX, but it wasn't without its challenges. Although the rocket successfully reached critical milestones, there were notable engine issues along the way. A Raptor engine malfunctioned during ascent, and another engine failure happened during the landing, resulting in a rather explosive outcome. These issues, although problematic, did not require a mishap report from the FAA, signaling that the overall flight was considered a partial success. However, the problems highlighted areas that needed refinement before SpaceX could achieve its ambitious goals. As SpaceX preps for Flight 5, engineers are focused now on addressing engine issues that caused problems in the previous launch. Potential improvements include enhancing the reliability of Raptor engines and revising the landing sequence to avoid the outcome of Flight 4. SpaceX's goal is to catch the rocket with the chopsticks. However, many believe that instead of taking the risk on this Flight 5 launch, SpaceX could choose intermediate steps, such as soft water landings before the more challenging ground-based catch. The recent move by SpaceX to hire a recovery ship for Booster 11 could be not only to study the rocket's debris or possibly restore it, but also to explore a landing spot for another Super Heavy before attempting to catch them. What do you think of this idea? Let us know down there in the comments. This is especially relevant because environmental concerns are a top priority. With a Starship launch site located near protective wildlife sanctuaries, environmental agencies are increasing their scrutiny, and SpaceX has to ensure future flights don't pose risk to these sensitive areas, particularly during the rocket landings and potential debris. This has led to discussions about stricter protective measures to minimize environmental impact during upcoming tests. Only by addressing these concerns and gaining leniency from environmental agencies can SpaceX maintain its launch cadence without disruptions that would throw off its schedule. Perfecting the Starship launch cadence is critical to SpaceX's long-term vision of revolutionizing space exploration. The company envisions Starship as the foundation for future missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond, with the ability to transport large payloads and crews across the solar system. This vision relies on a reliable and frequent launch schedule, which depends on refining the entire launch and landing process, particularly the booster recovery techniques. A key aspect of achieving this cadence is mastering the complex booster catching system using the chopsticks tower. Consistently recovering and reusing boosters without damage is essential to maintaining a high flight frequency. Each failed landing or loss of a booster slows the next mission and undermines the cost-effectiveness of reuse. SpaceX will need to conduct numerous test flights to perfect the timing, precision, and control needed to catch the booster, reducing the risk of damage to both the rocket and the environment. The stakes are particularly high for NASA's Artemis 3 mission, which aims to return astronauts to the Moon using a modified version of Starship. To support this mission, Starship needs to conduct multiple refueling flights in Earth orbit before actually landing on the Moon, and any failure in mastering the booster catching cadence or overall launch rhythm could jeopardize the Artemis 3 timeline in future missions. Furthermore, SpaceX's ability to launch Starship quickly and reliably is crucial for future Mars missions and large-scale space infrastructure projects, making the refinement of these systems a vital step towards the next era of human space exploration. This is insane. Here's an image of Booster 11 after its final soft water landing following Starship's fourth flight. It's important to uncover everything that happened to the booster during the landing. So, what's SpaceX going to do next with the B-11's shattered hardware? How did Elon react? In the past few days, the appearance of the 260-foot HOS Ridgewind service vessel off the coast of Boca Chica has garnered significant attention. This ship, equipped with a giant crane, has been hovering near the area where SpaceX's Starship booster sank into the Gulf of Mexico June 6th. The presence of the 260-foot Ridgewind has sparked speculation that Elon's commercial space company is recovering the 230-foot steel booster that hit the water, toppled over, and then sank. And yesterday, that's no longer speculation, as Elon himself posted a close-up photo of the shattered remains of Super Heavy's B-11 booster. Starship Super Heavy Booster Flight 4, it said. Known as Super Heavy Booster 11, its massive fuel tank and 33 engines sent a Starship upper stage into space during its fourth test flight back in June. This was the booster that did not explode before landing. Shortly after the flight, SpaceX said they have no plans to recover the spacecraft, but clearly the company or some other entity, maybe a wealthy collector, has had a change of heart about leaving the high-tech rocket parts out at sea. Take a closer look. The image truly gives off Star Destroyer wreckage vibes, like the ruins of a futuristic long-dead civilization, as Elon described it. We can no longer see the fuel tank or the 13 inner engines of the Super Heavy. All that remains are the 14 outermost Raptor 2 engines and the frame attached. This is likely the sturdiest part that connects the engines to the fuel tank. However, it's unclear whether the disintegration was due to the direct landing in the water or an explosion after B-11 hit the water, as predicted by an image of a fire spotted by a space engineer. Saying it broke apart from the impact with the water isn't wrong, as the Super Heavy rocket tipped in one direction upon landing, and the pressure from the weight and the rocket's heat caused the part that made contact with the water first to crumble. But saying it exploded also makes some sense, as just before B-11 neared the water, we saw a fire underneath the engines, particularly towards the outer ring of the engines. That would also explain why only half the engine stayed intact. What do you think caused such severe destruction to Super Heavy's B-11? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Recovering the parts of B-11 would give SpaceX an advantage in studying what happened to the remaining components, which would help prepare for the upcoming fifth flight when SpaceX aims to land Super Heavy once again and possibly catch it when it comes down with Mechazilla. This rocket still has much room for improvement, as Elon tweeted. Fixer-upper. It shows that although Starship may not be perfect yet, it's a work in progress with immense potential. Now, with more than 2 months left before getting the FAA license at the end of November, we believe this time frame is sufficient for SpaceX to learn many lessons. It's undeniable that SpaceX is likely to introduce some changes to Super Heavy B-12. The idea of retrieving old rockets from the ocean is not new. In 2021, HOS Briarwood, a ship similar to the one currently 15 miles off Boca Chica Beach, helped SpaceX recover parts of Falcon 9's rocket off the coast of Florida. Further back, NASA recovered nearly half the Challenger after the explosion in '86, in which 7 astronauts lost their lives. In 2013, Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon and founder of Blue Origin, led an expedition to collect the charred mechanical parts from the Saturn V rocket that carried Apollo astronauts to the moon in the late 60s and 70s. Some artifacts are on display in the Seattle Museum of Flight and the National Air and Space Museum in D.C. This suggests that not only has the tail section of the B-11 been recovered, but SpaceX is likely continuing to look for more. The excitement is building, and we can't wait for what's next. While the excitement from recovering the rocket offshore still lingers, SpaceX continues ramping up its operations at Starbase on land. Previously, we speculated Flight 6 might take off before Flight 5 based on Elon's tweets, but just a day after the 20th of September, B-12, part of Flight 5, along with its hot staging section, was moved to the launch site. Once there, it was immediately secured using the chopsticks, and on the morning of the 20th, it was placed on the Orbital Launch Mount, or OLM. Notably, the lifting of Booster 12 was done in a special manner. Typically, we only see the chopsticks lift Super Heavy and put it on the OLM, but this time, SpaceX lifted it all the way to the top of the tower before lowering it. This is the first time Super Heavy hit such a height, and it's almost certain that the rocket will be caught at that height. Just as SpaceX tweeted, Starbase Tower lifts the Super Heavy booster for Flight 5 to expected catch height. Accompanying the tweet were stunning images, the likes of which we haven't seen in some time. Upon closer inspection, it's clear that the interstage boost ring's missing from the top of Super Heavy, which is not surprising as the Starship launch profile involves SpaceX discarding the booster ring into the ocean before the rocket does a soft landing. This ring was a late add-on to Starship's design and one of the first upgrades after Flight 1 last year, which ended with the Starship's first and second stages failing to separate. After B-12 got put on the OLM, the hot staging section was added. By the end of September 21st, Ship 30 was transposed to the launch pad at Starbase. SpaceX announced the event on social media, emphasizing its importance. Ship 30 had undergone static fire tests and had an upgraded heat shield. Spacecraft's fully equipped with Raptor engines, promising improved navigation, deceleration, and landing capabilities compared to previous versions. With both B-12 and Ship 30 now at the launch pad, we could soon witness the first fully integrated prototype stack. Normally, the next step be a wet dress rehearsal, a critical pre-launch test. However, given the current situation and the FAA's review process, the timeline could be delayed. Elon has hinted that these activities might be to demonstrate SpaceX's readiness to the FAA. In addition to SpaceX's own efforts, more and more congressional efforts are coming forward to support SpaceX, urging the FAA to expedite the approval process for Starship flights. These include Congressman Kevin Kiley of California and Keith Self, a congressman of Texas, and even Donald Trump. Starship must be launched, and the U.S. needs to return to the moon before China does. This is no idle time for SpaceX or NASA, especially when NASA's Artemis lunar program is facing issues with its contractor Axiom. A detailed report reveals Axiom Space is facing financial challenges. Sources indicate that the company struggling to make payroll has fallen behind on payments to contractors, including SpaceX, and started downsizing operations. This comes at a time when external funding is becoming increasingly scarce. Last month, Axiom's longtime CEO and co-founder Mike Suffredini abruptly stepped down, citing personal reasons. He transitioned to an advisory role and will remain on the board. A new report suggests that Suffredini built Axiom into a mini NASA-like entity burdened with unnecessary costs. The company is now facing financial strain, with delays and downsizing threatening the viability of its space station projects. The report states, Axiom found itself struggling to make payroll, which reached $10 million a month by early last year, according to an internal document, and it fell behind on payments to suppliers. Axiom's primary goal was to build a commercial low Earth orbit space station by leveraging NASA's ISS. The station would consist of several modules for crew quarters, power, research, and manufacturing. Once fully assembled, it would detach and become an independent free-flying station. However, building and managing a space station takes time and expertise. In the interim, Axiom launched private astronaut missions to the ISS, targeting billionaires and wealthy nations. The company also secured funding from NASA to develop an EVA suit for Artemis's lunar missions. NASA awarded Axiom hundreds of millions of dollars to start suit development, selecting the company alongside Collins Aerospace, which has since dropped out, leaving Axiom as the sole competitor. These initiatives will require billions to develop, but NASA has only provided a fraction of the necessary funds. Additionally, Axiom's private astronaut missions have operated at a loss. A former exec noted, "There aren't many billionaires willing to spend 18 months training to become an astronaut for the ISS." To make matters worse, NASA mandates that a former NASA astronaut command each private mission, reducing Axiom's revenue from each mission by approximately 25%. The company expects its next mission in early 2025 to break even. On a more positive note, Axiom's spacesuit program is reportedly in better shape, thanks to steady NASA funding and a strong chance of becoming the sole provider unless SpaceX steps in. Despite raising $500 million in a recent funding round, Axiom's financial situation stays precarious. As soon as the money comes in, it went straight to paying SpaceX and other bills. Then it was gone, a former exec told Forbes. Under interim CEO and co-founder Kim Ghaffarian, the company has implemented layoffs, a voluntary 20% pay cut for employees, and talks about scaling back its space station plans. With continued delays to Axiom station's first launch and the ISS set to retire by the end of the decade, any reduction in scope puts Axiom's core mission at risk. If the company's primary goal of building an LEO station falters, its future becomes uncertain. A potential lifeline could come from a NASA contract to provide a replacement for the ISS. But Axiom faces stiff competition from companies like Vast, Blue Origin, Sierra Space, and even SpaceX with Starship. Whatever the outcome, Axiom faces a tough road ahead to turn its business model into a commercial success. If you do nothing, you're going to get criticized, which is perfectly normal. But when you're trying to make things more developed and better, you still get criticized. Even obstructed, which is incredibly hard to understand. But SpaceX, the company that probably understands this the most, the process of getting a rocket launch license is getting even harder. So we all know that the space race is increasingly becoming intense. Nations are starting to take strong actions to overthrow the dominance of the U.S. in aerospace. In this race, the U.S.'s advantage over other countries lies in its strong private aerospace companies. With world-leading technological capabilities, they'll be the key to helping the U.S. defeat its competitors. However, to fully leverage these advantages, companies and the government need to work together. This collaboration creates the combined strength that allows the U.S. to stay as the top dog. Sadly, it seems that things are not headed in that direction. Instead, there's a lot of issues. This can be clearly seen between SpaceX and the FAA. This relationship's gotten even worse over the recent days, particularly regarding SpaceX's space program. Now, I don't want to talk smack about the FAA, but what they're doing is really making life difficult for SpaceX. As you may know, the FAA recently once again delayed Starship's fifth flight. And this seems to have tested the patience of Elon as well as SpaceX. SpaceX had to publish a fairly long blog post condemning the FAA's lengthy investigation process. This seems to be a hallmark of this government agency since ancient times. But the question is, why has everything else changed for the sake of development, but they've not? Indeed. Old and outdated regulations can't keep up with the development of modern technology. Without commenting on SpaceX's post, the FAA surprisingly announced a fine for SpaceX related to 2 launches last year. It's not clear why it took more than a year for the agency to announce that fine. Could it be that if not due to the prolonged work processes, it's because the FAA didn't like what SpaceX said? No matter how we look at it, the FAA has faced criticism within the space community. And of course, this isn't the first time the FAA has made life difficult for SpaceX, especially in the development of Starship. To date, the FAA has been involved in reviewing the licenses for Starship flights, and they've delayed 3 launches, IFT-1, IFT-2, and finally Starship Flight 5, which we just talked about. Notably, regarding the license for Starship's first launch, the FAA had as many as 5 delays. In preparation for the first orbital launch, SpaceX proposed an environmental assessment to the FAA in late 2021, but it wasn't until Feb 22 that they initiated the PEA program for Starship. According to their reporting timeline, it was supposed to be published in May 22, but the FAA postponed it to June 22. And nearly 10 months later, in April 23, Starship could finally carry out its launch. The reason given to cover up the FAA's delay is the time-consuming consultations with local authorities or technical issues beyond their control. To be perfectly frank, this is due to their cumbersome and quite unprofessional evaluation process. The PEA assessment could have been done way earlier if the FAA had taken the PEA seriously from the get-go. As for Starship's second launch, SpaceX had to wait 7 months to get the FAA launch license. It cannot be denied that part of the time SpaceX spent during this period was to rebuild the launch pad, which had been destroyed by the power of SpaceX's previous launch. On top of that, they had to build a massive steel cooling plate with a water deluge system to be continuously used in future launches. But the delays of the FAA's process are undeniable. Clearly, by August 23, SpaceX had completed the repairs and tests on the launch pad in preparation for the flight, but they didn't officially get the license until November. Even more astonishing is that it's believed that the agency had to speed up the investigation due to pressure from SpaceX, NASA, and of course, public opinion. How about longer ago? Was the FAA this bad back then? Oh my goodness. It has to be said that the FAA has got a history of delays that are so unbearable that not everyone can endure it like SpaceX and Elon. In December 2020, SpaceX was attempting to launch and land their first ever Starship prototype. The FAA worked with SpaceX and granted them a launch license, but they could only launch under certain weather conditions. Minutes before SN8 took off, the FAA told SpaceX to cancel it. SpaceX employees at Mission Control ignored this message since they thought the weather was fine and that the FAA inspector just didn't have the latest weather data. After an impressive launch, SN8 had a hard landing and ended in a massive explosion. Although no one was hurt, the FAA was angry that SpaceX ignored their launch requirements. And they did stipulate that an FAA inspector has to be present for every flight of Starship from Boca Chica. The rigorous oversight from agencies behind the scenes played a role in delaying SpaceX's subsequent testing efforts with Starship SN9. The gleaming 16-story steel rocket was fully fueled and ready for takeoff. However, at that moment, FAA officials were still in the process of reviewing the license for the test, and SpaceX had made some changes to its permit application. During that time, Elon expressed extreme frustration with the process, tweeting, "Unlike its aircraft division, which is fine, the FAA space division has a fundamentally broken regulatory structure. The license violation and license review process have escalated tensions between SpaceX and the FAA. For years, Musk and others in the space industry have bemoaned the age-old U.S. regulatory framework for launch licensing as innovation and competition in space skyrockets. The delay of this agency is also manifested in the launch of Starship's SN11 with a very silly reason, as the FAA inspector just couldn't get to Starbase in time. In the end, you gotta wonder if the FAA truly understands the importance of SpaceX's Starship and the ability to launch it frequently from Boca Chica. Or we can ask the question of where Elon could potentially relocate Starship for launches without having to worry about these FAA regs. But that's not exactly easy either. SpaceX can't relocate from the U.S. because of the ITAR's regulations that would prohibit them from exporting any of their rocket technology. ITARs is the law prohibiting the exportation of technology that could be used for making munitions. Back in the 1960s, the U.S. alone had the technology to adjust the thrust of a rocket. For the purposes of rockets, if your guidance system could adjust the thrust, then you'd have a much greater control over accuracy. And this was very important, especially given the backdrop of the Cold War. And the technology to prevent that technology from falling into the wrong hands was pretty important. Starship's platform has largely been discussed in public media and presented on numerous occasions. It's got some powerful rocket motors that it uses in large quantities, and it almost certainly has technology that could fall into ITAR's jurisdiction. Therefore, it is hoped that there will be changes in the management of government agencies as well as the policies to create favorable conditions for SpaceX to continue to develop. Starship's importance isn't just limited to the company, but also holds a very important meaning for the presence and leadership of both civil and military sectors of the United States in space. In the short term, NASA selected a variant of the Starship spacecraft as a lander to bring Artemis astronauts to the moon's surface, needed for the Artemis 3 mission as soon as 2026. But the impact of a long-term license suspension or revocation would definitely slow down the timeline for the launch. Beyond NASA, Starship's part of a rapidly expanding private sector launch industry. There's no current private sector equivalent that could rapidly deploy satellite constellations or deliver major logistical infrastructure into orbit like satellite and refueling stations, which could be critical as geopolitical tensions on Earth escalate into space. There could be a future peer commercial competitor to Starship, but surveying the current landscape and understanding how much time and money goes into building rockets, that's unlikely to happen anytime soon. Besides, the Chinese space program has grown rapidly in recent decades. The PRC launched its first astronaut into space back in 2003 and built a space station, Tianyang, which was completed in 2022. Longer-term plans include building a permanent settlement on the moon called the International Lunar Research Station, which it aims to build with Russia and other partner countries. While the ILRS aims to rival NASA's multilateral Artemis, China is closely watching Starship's development. China is building its own next-gen super heavy-lift rocket, the Long March 9. Starship's development's still far ahead, but it's clear which rocket China is comping, and it's not the SLS. Initially, Long March was expendable, but in November 2022, designers decided to switch to a version with a reusable first stage. By March of the following year, China announced it'd be fully reusable. In other words, the result of the Starship test has geopolitical implications too. Without Starship, it's not unreasonable to think that China would have a reusable super heavy lift rocket that could quickly deliver crew, cargo, and infrastructure to low Earth orbit and beyond, not just the United States. So, it is imperative that parties work to produce a timely solution of the legal and these regulatory issues that engage with the local community on environmental impact, ensuring that SpaceX has taken the steps to ensure such damage to and around the sites does not happen again, and allows for testing to move forward this year to keep the U.S. competitive. Tensions between Elon, SpaceX, and the government agency, the FAA, are increasingly escalating. However, this has not slowed down SpaceX's engineering teams, who are racing to complete tests for the company's ambitious Starship program, a project they've been nurturing for years. How's this legal battle heating up, and is SpaceX testing a new prototype to alter its current launch plans? On September 18th, SpaceX did a static fire test for the second stage of Starship. Notably, this test wasn't for the prototype set to fly in Starship's Flight 5, but instead for Ship 31, the star of Starship Flight 6. That same evening, SpaceX confirmed the completion of the static fire test for Starship 6 test flight. 6-engine static fire of Flight 6 Starship. The test went exceptionally well, with close-up shots of Ship 31 and the 6 Raptor engines. This test is one of the final steps SpaceX routinely takes for its prototypes prior to launch. It indicates that with Ship 31 passing the test smoothly, it's ready to stack with its partner Booster 13. And if SpaceX can prepare this booster for the 6th test flight at a similar pace without encountering any obstacles or unexpected issues during testing in November, the company could potentially conclude its Starship testing program this year with a total of 4 completed flights. This is entirely possible, and as Elon has confidently stated, Flight 5 is built and ready to fly. Flight 6 will be ready to fly before Flight 5 even gets approved by the FAA. Indeed, SpaceX revealed that the FAA issued a delay notice for the fifth flight last week, which the company said was due to superfluous environmental analysis. The unjustified delay from the FAA comes as the agency requested an additional 60 days for investigation, citing concerns that catching Starship could produce numerous supersonic booms that could be heard in surrounding areas of the return site. It's worth noting that SpaceX had previously demonstrated that supersonic booms at various intensities do not cause harmful effects. So, does this mean that if SpaceX doesn't attempt to catch the Super Heavy on this flight, that Starship could be granted its launch license immediately? It's safe to say that Ship 30 and Booster 12 underwent significant changes to carry out an epic fifth flight featuring a Super Heavy catch, but with Flight 6 ready, as Elon suggested even before the launch license for Flight 5 gets issued, this means Ship 31 and Booster 13, as long as they don't attempt to catch the Super Heavy, could be ready for launch even before November. What do you think about this? If the wait drags on, could SpaceX fly Flight 6 before Flight 5? Let us know in the comments below. Continuing with the SpaceX activities at Starbase, although it may seem that the company's focused its attention on components for Flight 6, in reality, SpaceX is not neglecting preparations for Flight 5 with the highly important goal of catching Super Heavy's booster mid-air. SpaceX has been testing the tower arms while awaiting the fifth Starship test flight in November. On September 20th, SpaceX conducted several tests using the chopsticks. Unlike previous tests where the chopsticks were positioned at the lower part of the launch tower, in these new tests, SpaceX moved the arms to the top of the tower before carrying out 8 separate tests. These tests will help SpaceX evaluate the vibrations and endurance of the top of the tower when subjected to significant pressure at its most sensitive point. Let's watch this video to see if the top of the tower shakes noticeably. Additionally, in the early hours of September 20th, SpaceX rolled out Booster 12 to the launch site, so we might even witness a stacking event shortly afterward. Amidst the bustling activity over at Starbase, tensions between Elon, SpaceX, and the FAA continue to escalate. It seems SpaceX and Elon are determined to reclaim their rights for their rocket programs this time. After the FAA imposed an unreasonable fine of $633,000 for a violation of launch licenses during Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy launches last year, a war of words and legal action has been ignited. On SpaceX's side, on September 18th, David Harris, SpaceX's VP of Legal Affairs, sent a 4-page letter to the leaders of 2 congressional committees overseeing the FAA, outlining further objections from the company and reaffirming its commitment to safety. SpaceX forcefully rejects the FAA's assertion that it violated regulations, Harris wrote. The first involved PSN Satria launch in June, where SpaceX operated under an outdated license revision that specified its launch control room location and required a T-2 hour poll. In the letter, it was written that SpaceX believes that the FAA has sufficient time to approve the minor amendment. They also stated out of nowhere in the FAA's regulations that it does require a T-2 hour probe. The launch happened, no one was injured, and it did not affect public safety, with the FAA involved throughout the process, so everything was fine. The second violation happened during the Jupiter 3 launch July, where SpaceX used a new RP-1 propellant farm without proper FAA approval. In the letter, Harris made claims that could support SpaceX's belief that they were permitted to use the farm. As with all commercial launches in the U.S., FAA is part of the launch process. SpaceX said the FAA representative on the control panel didn't stop the launch, and according to SpaceX, the FAA sent a letter to the company during the launch about the farm and didn't go into detail about the letter's content. Furthermore, SpaceX claimed that they called FAA leadership during Jupiter 3's countdown to discuss the unapproved RP-1 farm, and sending a letter that close to the launch was unsafe. The SpaceX letter said the FAA leadership on the call agreed with this assessment and did not direct SpaceX to stand down, nor did they pull their license. The FAA, Harris wrote, was failing to keep pace with the commercial spaceflight industry and suggested the fine may be the agency's response to increased congressional scrutiny of the FAA's oversight in the commercial space industry. SpaceX said it's been clear for some time that the FAA's Commercial Space Office lacks the resources to timely review licensing materials and mistakenly focuses its limited resources on areas unrelated to its public safety regulatory scope. Asked about the letter, the FAA said it does not comment on active enforcement issues. As for Elon Musk, he's been frustrated for years about what he perceives as government inefficiency and has clashed with federal regulators. He's grown increasingly tired of SpaceX struggling to get FAA approval for rocket launches and new technology. After SpaceX sent a letter to the government, Elon immediately shared it, expressing his anger and saying the FAA leadership spends their resources attacking SpaceX for petty matters that have nothing to do with safety while neglecting real safety issues at Boeing. This is deeply wrong and puts human lives at risk. Additionally, Musk referenced NASA's decision to choose SpaceX to bring astronauts back to Earth instead of Boeing, highlighting SpaceX's importance and questioning why the FAA didn't find Boeing. NASA deemed the Boeing capsule unsafe for astronaut return, turning out of necessity to SpaceX, yet instead of fining Boeing for putting astronauts at risk, the FAA is fining SpaceX for trivia. Enough is enough. Both the FAA and Boeing declined to comment on Musk's post on X. This might be because there's no longer any excuse strong enough to counter the truth that Elon spelled out. Do you agree with this? Feel free to comment yes below. Honestly, SpaceX would prefer fewer regulations. Indeed, more regulations means slower growth. However, it's also true that the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation that oversees licenses is grossly understaffed. Congress is the only body that can actually address that. NASA is caught in the middle right now. They've got to be concerned because SpaceX is handling many of the most important missions right now, even for the next half a century. The immediate critical mission for NASA and SpaceX is Crew 9, but it's facing the possibility of getting delayed. The delay in SpaceX Crew 9 mission to the ISS is to allow teams to work through pre-launch operations and hardware processing ahead of the first human spaceflight launch from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, while also monitoring weather ahead of liftoff, NASA officials wrote in an emailed statement. The launch is now scheduled for no earlier than 2:05 Eastern Time, September 26th. If Crew 9 misses the Sep 26 opportunity, backup dates are available on the 27th and 28th. Crew 9 will be the first human launch from SLC-40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, which normally has infrastructure available for satellite missions. Humans require a launch tower with walkable access to the spacecraft, among many other changes. Crew 9 was originally manifested to launch 4 astronauts in the SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft for a mission lasting through February of next year. Now it's just going to send 2 aboard the SpaceX Falcon 9. NASA astronaut and U.S. Space Force Commander Nick Haug and Roscosmos astronaut and mission specialist Alexander Gorbanov. Haug will be the first active Space Force Guardian to launch into space, in addition to launching from a Space Force-operated launch pad. Crew Dragon's other 2 seats, which were supposed to be for NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Stephanie Wilson, will hold mass simulators instead. Wilson and Cardman remain eligible for future ISS assignments. That leaves room for 2 other NASA astronauts on the ISS to return due to being unable to fly home on their originally assigned spacecraft. The ISS astronauts waiting for SpaceX's arrival are Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, who reached the orbiting complex June 6th during Boeing's Starliner's first crewed mission. Interstellar travel, the idea of journeying beyond our solar system, seemed to explore distant stars and potentially habitable planets, has long captured the imagination of humanity. While this concept has been a staple of sci-fi, recent advances in space technology have brought this possibility closer to reality. Interstellar travel represents one of the greatest challenges in human history, requiring innovations in propulsion, life support, and spacecraft design far beyond what's available today. Despite these monumental obstacles, the vision of reaching other star systems remains a driving force for scientists, engineers, and space enthusiasts. Among the leaders in this ambitious pursuit is Elon Musk and his company SpaceX. Known for its revolutionary advancements in rocket technology, SpaceX has set its sights on a future where humanity colonizes other planets within our solar system and reaches the stars. While the company is currently focused on developing the Starship for missions to Mars and beyond, Elon's made it clear that his ultimate goal is to make interstellar travel a reality. The Starship is designed to traverse our entire solar system and beyond to the cloud of objects surrounding us. A future Starship, much larger and more advanced, will travel to other star systems. To realize this, SpaceX has created an advanced spacecraft so capable, large, and powerful that it could surpass the vast distances between star systems. The company is currently focusing on developing the Starship Super Heavy, a revolutionary spacecraft designed for deep space exploration. This launch vehicle boasts twice the power of the Saturn V moon rocket, making it the most powerful spacecraft ever developed. The Starship Super Heavy is intended to be fully reusable, transporting up to 200 tons of cargo or passengers to destinations in space at a low cost. This capability opens up the entire solar system for human exploration, making it feasible to build bases on the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Looking to the future, SpaceX has more plans. Elon announced that the company is already conceptualizing more versions of the Starship. These starships would be significantly larger and more sophisticated, designed to travel to other star systems and possibly send humans to neighboring stars. While this technology needed for interstellar travel is far beyond what any country or company currently has, SpaceX is determined to lay the foundation for humanity's journey to the stars. The first step towards this milestone is the colonization of Mars, a long-held ambition of Elon Musk. He set an ambitious goal to colonize Mars by sending 1 million people to the Red Planet by 2050. This initiative is driven by the belief that establishing a self-sustaining colony on Mars is crucial for the future of humanity's presence in space. With its unique environment and access to resources like water ice and a variety of minerals, Mars offers the potential for in situ resource utilization, allowing colonists to produce the materials needed for survival and construction directly on the planet. This capability would reduce the dependency on supplies from Earth, making long-term livability more feasible and cost-effective. Additionally, Mars's lower gravity and its proximity to the asteroid belt make it an ideal location for launching other exploration missions, including those aimed at interstellar travel. Strategically, Mars could serve as a key launch point for missions beyond our solar system. Its location and resources provide a valuable staging ground for developing and testing the technologies needed for interstellar journeys, facilitating the next great leap in human exploration. One of the most exciting and speculative concepts for interstellar travel is the Alcubierre drive, a theoretical propulsion system that could enable faster-than-light travel. Proposed by physicist Miguel Alcubierre in 1994, the idea involves creating a warp bubble around a spacecraft, contracting space in front of it and expanding space behind it. Instead of the ship moving through space, space itself would move, allowing the vessel to effectively surf on this wave of warped spacetime. This would theoretically allow the spacecraft to travel faster than light without violating the laws of physics, as the ship would not technically be moving through space at superluminal speeds, but rather idling at the curvature of spacetime. While the Alcubierre drive offers a tantalizing vision of faster-than-light travel, it faces enormous scientific and technological challenges. One of the biggest is the energy requirement. Creating and sustaining a warp bubble would likely demand an astronomical amount of energy, potentially equivalent to the mass energy of entire stars. Furthermore, the drive would require exotic forms of matter or negative energy, substances that have not yet been proven to exist in the necessary quantities or may not exist at all. This makes the energy demands far beyond our current rocket technological capabilities. Chemical rockets, which rely on the combustion of propellants to generate thrust, are the foundation of modern space exploration. However, they are limited by the relatively low efficiency of chemical reactions. While chemical rockets are sufficient for reaching nearby destinations like the Moon or Mars, they are impractical for interstellar travel due to their inability to achieve the high speeds necessary to cover the vast distances between stars within a reasonable time frame. At best, chemical rockets could only reach a tiny fraction of the speed of light, meaning that a journey to the nearest star system, Proxima Centauri, would take hundreds of thousands of years. To overcome this, SpaceX is exploring propulsion technologies that could make that feasible. One approach is the development of nuclear rockets. Nuclear propulsion could significantly increase the speed of spacecraft by using reactions to generate thrust. The technology has the potential to enable spacecraft to reach a much higher fraction of the speed of light, reducing travel times to other star systems from millennia to just decades. For instance, a nuclear-powered vehicle could potentially reach Proxima Centauri in half a century, making it viable for long-distance missions. Another, even more advanced concept under consideration is the use of antimatter engines. Antimatter offers the potential for a leap in propulsion technology due to the energy released when matter and antimatter annihilate each other. This reaction creates roughly 9 times more energy than nuclear, making it possible to achieve speeds much closer to that of light. An antimatter starship could dramatically reduce the travel time to neighboring star systems, potentially making journeys achievable within a single human lifetime. However, developing antimatter engines presents its own set of challenges, such as the production, storage, and handling, which currently remains prohibitively expensive and technologically complex. Scientifically, sustaining human life for extended periods in space introduces unprecedented complexities. Interstellar missions would need closed-loop life support systems capable of recycling air, water, and food for potentially multiple generations of people. Radiation protection, artificial gravity, and psychological well-being on long voyages are also concerns that remain unsolved. The political challenges are also significant. The development of advanced propulsion systems, particularly nuclear or antimatter, could trigger geopolitical tensions, as these technologies could be perceived as dual use with potential military applications. Furthermore, the approval and regulation of interstellar missions, which may involve mining space resources or launching large-scale projects, would require international cooperation. Global treaties governing space, like the Outer Space Treaty, may need revision to address the new realities of deep space exploration. Developing and deploying these advanced technologies also carries risks. The use of nuclear power in space, for instance, poses environmental hazards in the event of accidents, both during launch and in space. Antimatter, if mishandled, could result in catastrophic explosions. There are also risks associated with long-term human spaceflight, radiation exposure, equipment failure, and the psychological toll of isolation. These uncertainties make interstellar travel not only a monumental technical challenge, but also a risky venture with potentially far-reaching consequences for humanity. Despite the enthusiasm for interstellar exploration, these immense challenges must be navigated carefully, balancing ambition with responsibility and ensuring that the pursuit of stars does not come at too great a cost. Yet another challenge will arise within the interstellar travel process. Alcubierre drive is ensuring the safety of the spacecraft and its occupants. The theoretical model suggests that intense gravitational forces could be generated within the warp bubble, potentially harming the spacecraft or any nearby objects in space. Additionally, the Alcubierre drive would likely generate enormous amounts of radiation, which could pose significant risks to both the crew and any destination it reaches. Despite these challenges, the concept of Alcubierre drive continues to inspire scientists and engineers as a potential solution for overcoming the seemingly insurmountable distances between stars. While still in the realm of sci-fi, it represents a cutting edge of theoretical physics in space travel, a vision of a future where interstellar travel could be completed in months instead of centuries. SpaceX is certain to be the pioneer for this greater goal in the coming years. Starship is going to be the key player in conquering the vast limits of space. Therefore, although Starship is currently still in new vehicle testing, it always carries an aura of potential that can accomplish anything with continuous innovation and upgrades. Once SpaceX successfully achieves regular operations with Starship, similar to the current Falcon 9, it'll simultaneously accelerate the development of new plans like traveling to Mars and interstellar exploration. Of course, this cannot be done without funding from the Starlink business. The financial potential of Starlink is quite staggering. With millions of people across 99 countries already subscribing, SpaceX projects that Starlink could generate up to $1 trillion annually once fully operational. This money could not only come from traditional internet subscriptions, but also from emerging markets like mobile phone services, where conventional networks struggle to provide coverage. Starlink's ability to provide fast broadband to areas with little to no connectivity opens a vast and largely untapped market of potential users. This revenue would come with exceptionally high profit margins since satellite operations require low maintenance after deployment. By securing a steady and substantial cash flow from Starlink, SpaceX can reduce its reliance on external investors and government contracts, allowing the company to develop the technologies necessary for Mars colonization and interstellar travel. Yet we're going for it and humbly submit having good confidence in landing it. Well, this was a pretty bold statement from the CEO of Blue Origin regarding the successful landing of the New Glenn rocket on its very first launch. It's unclear whether this is trustworthy or just an exaggerated statement intended to capture public attention. However, the first move by SpaceX's competitor was to unveil a barge that actually resembles a copy of SpaceX's drone ship. Usually, the outcome of such copies doesn't turn out as successful, as we've seen with those rockets in China. So, how about Blue Origin's copy? All right, we're all familiar with the two major competitors in space, Blue Origin and SpaceX. The two companies are notorious for their intense rivalry and heated conflicts between their founders. But in reality, we can already see who's ahead. While Blue Origin only launched its first suborbital rocket in 2015 with just a handful of launches since, SpaceX has launched the reusable orbital Falcon rockets, with the number of launches and landings reaching hundreds, nearly 400 launches to be precise. So, has Blue Origin just lost this race or what? Of course not. As long as the company's still in operation, there's always a chance to catch up, and Jeff Bezos always thinks this way. And if he can't make something new, he decides to do what SpaceX has already done, using that very strategy to potentially one-up his rival. When looking at the render of New Glenn, we can immediately recognize a Falcon 9, although it's slightly larger in size. Since we have yet to see the fully completed New Glenn, it's still not possible to make a completely fair comparison. However, the company has unveiled something essential that's a lot similar to SpaceX's setup for lowering costs through reusable rockets that land after launch: a barge. This vehicle is going to be crucial to the success of landing New Glenn's booster, as proudly stated by their CEO Dave Limp. Recently, on September 5th, this ship appeared at Port Canaveral in Florida. Finally, after a long wait, we can see the shape of Blue Origin's mysterious barge and how much it looks like SpaceX's creations. The landing barge for Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, named Jacqueline, is also named after the mom of Blue Origin's founder, Jeff Bezos. The barge is significantly larger than SpaceX's well-known drone ships, measuring 115 meters in length and 45 in width, while SpaceX's ship are approximately 92 by 46 meters. To explain the special size of this barge, Dave Limp specifically mentioned a comparison to the landing pad for New Shepard. Even though it has a landing pad similar in size to the New Shepard, Jacqueline is designed to receive New Glenn, a rocket 3 times taller with many more engines. This is explained by the physical principle of the center of gravity, similar to how it's easier to balance a broom than a pencil. This is also why the new CEO feels pretty confident about the first landing attempt with his baby rocket. One of the standout features of the barge is the presence of 4 large structures, 2 on each side of the platform. While their specific functions have not yet been officially clarified, they are speculated to serve purposes ranging from power gen to equipment storage and aiding in the booster securement process after landing. However, when compared overall, SpaceX's drone ship is just more streamlined than Jacqueline. This simplicity allows them to avoid heavy damage in case bad incidents occur during the rocket landing. To be honest, from the get-go, New Glenn's planned landing system was a lot more complex and massive. In 2018, Blue Origin purchased an old roll-off cargo ship to convert it into a landing platform. For several years, leading up to 2022, the ship underwent refurbishment at the port to prepare it for a new role in landing the first stage of its launch vehicles. The plan was for the boosters to get recovered from long-range missions launched from Complex 36 at Cape Canaveral, and the ship stabilized hydrodynamically as it moved to the Atlantic. Blue Origin chose this approach from the outset, believing it would provide the best opportunity to recover the first stage successfully. For example, the ship was to be outfitted with stabilization technology to improve recovery success in rough seas and keep launches on schedule. However, Blue Origin's thinking has changed somewhat. In June 2022, renowned space journal Eric Berger tweeted that it appeared Blue Origin would use the same contractor SpaceX had previously used to modify a large drone ship for landing New Glenn's first stage, replacing the previous ship-based landing approach. This tweet was a response to another post that delved into Blue Origin's future operations, which mentioned that the company had selected La Amelia of Louisiana to build its autonomous drone landing platform. Of course, there were no longer any doubt that this would be born from what would be a sibling to SpaceX's drone ships. Eventually, in August 2022, Blue Origin abandoned the plan to use the ship as a landing platform, and the vessel was towed toward the port of Brownsville for dismantling. At that time, Port Director Clark Merritt explained that the conversion had progressed too far to return the ship to cargo service, which is why it got scrapped. He did not specify why the conversion was halted. A Blue Origin spokesperson stated that the company remains committed to a safe and cost-effective approach to space access, and after careful consideration, decided to move away from using the ship as a landing solution. Blue Origin likely found this specific approach raised concerns related to cost, scheduling, and other complexities. At that time, Blue Origin did not reveal what alternative options they were considering, but rumors that they were leaning towards a barge version similar to the ones used by SpaceX grew increasingly certain among the public. To be fair, Elon wasn't the first to come up with the idea of launching a rocket from a coastal launch site and landing it on a ship at sea. In fact, Blue Origin beat him to the punch by filing a patent for landing rockets at sea in 2010. However, SpaceX successfully challenged this patent, citing that others had proposed the idea earlier. Since then, no matter which company does a sea landing, Blue Origin no longer has legal grounds to pursue any litigation, a tactic that they had used quite often to hinder SpaceX's development. After all these years, what Blue Origin fought for over a decade ago is now being realized. But they're too ambitious. Jeff Bezos even wants to achieve a successful landing on the first launch of New Glenn. The reality is that the first attempt is unlikely to be that smooth, as damage to any landing platform is a real risk. With SpaceX, we've witnessed several launches where boosters collided with a drone ship and blew up. In the first few attempts with New Glenn, we could very well see similar results. New Glenn's launch and landing process involves several critical steps designed to ensure the safe recovery and reuse of the rocket's first stage booster. After the booster separates from the second stage during ascent, it undergoes a series of maneuvers to reorient itself for re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. Using a combination of aerodynamics and controlled thrust, the booster slows down and adjusts its trajectory for a precision landing. As the booster descends, it deploys its landing legs and adjusts its attitude using fins and wing-like strakes to ensure accurate positioning. The booster's goal is to land upright on Blue Origin's landing barge, which will be stationed in the Atlantic. The barge, designed specifically for this recovery operation, provides a stable platform to catch the returning rocket, even after a high-speed atmospheric re-entry. Once the booster lands on the barge, the platform plays a role in securing it for transport. The recovered booster is then transported back to Port Canaveral, where it undergoes inspection and refurbishment in preparation for reuse on future missions, aligning with Blue Origin's goal of reducing launch costs through the reuse of rocket components. All this was part of Blue Origin's plan for New Glenn's first launch to carry the payload to Mars, the Escapade mission, in October of this year. Unfortunately, on September 6th, NASA and Blue Origin announced a delay, postponing to the spring of next year. Honestly, I'm just starting to lose patience with this company. It seems like there was excitement when Blue Origin continuously revealed new hardware images, but the recurring word here is delay. This change in schedule underscores the challenges Blue Origin faces as they ramp up production at New Glenn, which is already 4 years behind schedule. Last month, the company experienced